Temporary status allowed people to turn themselves in at the border to be evaluated by Border and Customs. Most of them were deported and rejected, but a few select number were allowed after a detention to stay in the United States with a court hearing about their immigration status. Many of those people became U.S. residents. However, about 500,000 are still in a legal limbo. Unfortunately for those people, that legal limbo has come to an end with the termination of temporary status by the current administration. Despite the fact they didn't enter the United States illegally, they turned themselves into Border and Customs, and they did things legally, they did things the right way. They were still rejected by a country that doesn't want them. What is going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of people who are living in the United States under temporary status now that the current administration has ordered that these people will become illegal in the United States? Without a doubt, many of them are going to continue to stay in the United States illegally, but those who are smart are going to go to better countries that offer them better options. On today's video, we're going to talk about Cubans and the options that they have, Nicaraguans and the options that they have, as well as Venezuelans and Haitians, to discover exactly what are the options that these individuals have who are no longer going to be allowed to reside in the United States. Some of these individuals have used their time very wisely, saving money and planning for a better future. Others have made themselves comfortable in a country that doesn't want them. On today's video, we're going to learn what these people's options are and what they're going to do now that they're being deported. Uber driving here in South Florida, I've met a lot of people from all these countries, and I think we're taking a huge loss by letting these people go because they're really contributing greatly to the economy, and the overwhelming majority are doing things the right way. But again, we're not here to debate politics. We're just here to talk about what options these people have who are no longer able to reside in the United States. So now that temporary status has been rejected by the U.S. federal government, what is going to happen to the Cubans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, and Venezuelans that were living in the United States under temporary status, about 500,000 people? So being in Florida, let's start off by talking about Cubans. In the past, Cubans came directly from Cuba to the United States, and the only thing they knew was the comparison of Cuba to the United States. However, recently Cuban arrivals have had to go to Brazil or Nicaragua, which means by the time they get to the United States, they've seen a handful of countries or two. Now, most new recent arrivals on temporary status that I have met have not liked life in the United States. Now, keep in mind that I am Cuban myself. I have a lot of family. Some of them came recently, and I'm also Uber driving in South Florida. I speak Spanish, so I'm talking to people as I Uber drive and getting their stories about, their experiences in life. Many of the people that I talk to that came under temporary status from Cuba are telling me that they don't like life in the United States. A lot of them were first in Nicaragua or Brazil, or they went through Costa Rica or Panama, and they like those countries more. Life in the United States, they find, is just way too hectic. Now, life in the United States is not for everybody. There's even songs about it, like a song from a famous Cuban group called Cola Loca, which just relates the struggle of somebody who comes to the United States and really misses Cuba. Of course, the number one incentive for people coming to the United States from Cuba is to improve their life financially. And many people discovered that the best way to improve their life financially was to come to the United States, work, save a lot of money, and then go back to their home country. Now, a lot of Cubans that are here in the United States have all their family here. For example, I have had family members that came recently from Cuba, and now they're scratching their heads wondering they're going to have to go back, even though everybody they're related to is already in the United States. So that's somewhat of a question mark there. For those Cubans who came to the United States and wanted to stay here, and most of their families here, the notion of going back to Cuba after being here has to be a difficult one, but they did understand that the possibility was there for them not to get approved. After all, we've seen over the last few years, not just recently, how people who had temporary status eventually were not able to stay, so it wasn't a guaranteed thing, and a lot of them, if not most of them, knew that. A lot of the Cubans that I meet on Uber have already lived in Brazil. They tell me that in Brazil, people are fun, people like to party. You can make about $1,000 a month, which actually isn't that bad considering the cost of living there. In the case of Cubans, most of them wanted to stay here, but there's that huge percentage, I'm going to guess maybe 30% probably, didn't like the United States. Now, when they leave Cuba and come over here, a lot of them discovered that they don't like the United States, and then they're stuck here. They don't have a choice. Too many of the Cubans that I met that are on that temporary status understand the notion that they don't want to live in the United States. They came here to make money and go back to Cuba. All they really wanted is maybe an American car. That's about the only real thing they want to take back with them. Now, I posted on social media that many people in the United States have been working on temporary status, saving up money to buy a truck and then go back to Cuba. And yes, you can ship a truck to Cuba. You have to pay taxes in the United States, and you got to pay the transportation fee, which is about $6,000. I frankly couldn't believe the comments that I read from people on that post. How you could be envious of somebody getting deported is beyond me. Let me just explain to you guys that somebody who's been in the United States for 3 years, paying no rent, living in a family member's house, in a country they really don't want to be in, with the notion of coming here to save money, can easily stack up a few $100,000. It's not that difficult. Most of the Haitians that I know on Uber, I drive them back and forth from work, they're working 3 jobs. They're barely sleeping. And these are people on temporary status. So they know they got a limited time to make something here in the United States, and they're using their time wisely. They're not at home watching YouTube and eating potato chips all day like you are, or playing video games. They came here to make money, and that's exactly what they did. First of all, to ship a car to Cuba, all these cars that you're seeing here are in Cuba. You can ship anything you want to Cuba. It has to go through a U.S. port, which means that it has to be registered with the government. You got to pay taxes on it, and it has to be paid off. So all these people saying these are stolen cars, no, you're not going to ship a stolen car out of a port in the United States heading to a country like Cuba without the car having proper documentation. They worked for it. They paid for it. The people that are saying that these cars are stolen are saying that out of jealousy. They hate immigrants, and the notion that these people came here, stacked up a crap load of money, and went back to their home country with something that you've been here your whole life and haven't got, well, it's not their fault that you're lazy. They came here, they worked, they made money, they beat the system, and now they're home, and the cars are not stolen. You're not going to drive a stolen car into a port in Tampa or Miami and ship it to Cuba. That's not how this world works. They worked for it. The car has to be paid off before it can get on the ship. And yes, it is legal. You can ship cars from Tampa, Miami. There's a few ports in Canada you can send them for. All the ports in Europe will send a car to Cuba. The craze right now in Cuba is GMC trucks, and you can get those in Florida. There's places where you can literally walk into a dealership, pick out your GMC truck, buy it, and then you pay it once it arrives in Cuba. You can just ship the car to Cuba, you pay for it in Florida. So yes, this is a normal thing, and yes, there are cars like this all over Cuba right now. Well, as soon as it gets off the port, some cop's gonna steal it. Where are you guys getting these ideas from? Cuba is one of the safest countries that there is. It's known for poverty, not for crime. Cuba is the size of Tennessee, and there's like 8 million people on the island at this point probably, so it's not a big place. It's an island that has very little infrastructure, very little transportation. If you steal a car in Cuba, there's practically nowhere to hide it. You're stuck on an island the size of Tennessee. Cops in Cuba cannot drive around in an F-350 or a GMC truck. A cop in Cuba can't even get a new bicycle. You don't know what you're talking about. See, like, this is the crazy thing is when I see people on Facebook or YouTube making these crazy comments about something that they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. I was born in Cuba. I've gone back to Cuba to visit my family. The notion that a cop is going to steal your truck in Cuba like it was Mexico, shut your mouth. You have no idea how stupid you sound to somebody who's actually been to Cuba and understands how that country works. And it isn't just American cars. There's European cars. There's all types of cars going into Cuba right now. It's not just American cars. So American cars are the preferred, particularly GMC, but there's all types of different cars. And no, a cop isn't going to steal your truck from you in Cuba. That's not even realistic. Just so you have an idea, when I went to Cuba in like 2011, I stayed at my aunt's house. Her husband was a cop. I bought them a $15 gallon of paint so they could paint the front of their house because I thought it would make their house look nicer. They looked at me like I was an idiot and said, dude, he's a cop. We can't paint our house because somebody's going to denounce him. In other words, in Cuba right now, if you're a cop, you can't even paint your freaking house without it being a red flag. So what makes you think a cop is going to take a $60,000, $70,000 truck here in the U.S., it's probably worth $100,000 in Cuba, and take it from you, and it's going to be okay? No, a cop in Cuba has to drive a freaking bicycle, if you didn't realize that. In fact, a cop in Cuba has to live according to his salary. A cop can't even get a new bicycle because he shouldn't, in theory, be able to afford it with his salary. But it's like wasting your breath replying to stupid people on the internet. They're just talking out of their mouths. And the craziest thing is that you can tell the jealousy and hate that they have, that these people were able to come here, work, and then go back to their home country with a little bit better of a life standard. Now, the influx of American cars that are newer has kind of brought down the price of the old American clunkers. You guys know in Cuba, the old American cars were like the huge thing forever. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still buy a solid old school American car in Cuba, but the prices have came down dramatically because the Cuban consumers want to be in a brand new GMC, not in a 56 Chevy. But for those working in tourism, these cars have a lot of value for the tourist industry. So what has happened is the influx of American and European cars, newer cars, means that the average Cuban doesn't want to be seen in one of these things. These are more like for tourists, and it's almost like become taboo for a Cuban to actually drive these things. And there's been a lot of incentive for people to take ridiculously expensive cars to Cuba, because usually the money is made here in the United States by somebody who can't have the money here, so they grab it, buy something, ship it to Cuba, and it's a real easy way for somebody to make money disappear in the United States, aka money laundering. On top of that, car prices in Cuba were extraordinarily inflated. I mean, you have no idea. Like a Camry here in the United States would have been like $30,000 brand new. It used to be $100,000. So now, because prices of vehicles in Cuba were so inflated, it's been an incentive for people in Miami who have money to ship cars to Cuba. So yeah, they flooded Cuba with newer cars. Now, most tourists that go to Cuba want to have their own freaking vehicle. Thus, this right here has become a thing. They'll ship a car to Cuba, and then they'll rent it to Cubans, or they'll rent it to people who are tourists. So yes, you can make money in Cuba renting a vehicle, just like you can in the United States. And that's been a huge incentive as well for people to send cars to Cuba. So the notion of being in the United States, saving up some money, getting a car in Cuba, it will pay off very well, because in Cuba, it's a very rentable business. Like this person here is renting this car for about $70 a day. That's not bad at all. That's about $2,000 a month roughly. So it's a pretty good deal. It pays itself off well. Now, prices for renting a car in Cuba from the government were ridiculous, and the quality of the rentals and the things that happened to these rentals was so insane that it would make sense for somebody in the United States visiting their family in Cuba to want to rent this GMC truck for $200, $300 a day, $500 a day. It doesn't matter. Like, you're getting a new American vehicle versus renting whatever the crap the government has in Cuba. I just uploaded a picture of people using government cars to transport stolen meat in them. So it's not exactly an ideal situation to go to Cuba and rent a car from the government. Thus, if somebody has something like this and you're visiting your family in Cuba and it's $3,000 a week, like, it makes sense. Like, somebody would pay it. It's logical. Another thing that people here in the United States may not know about Cuba is the license plate system. The first letter, a P, means it's particular or private. That means somebody owns it privately. And thus, like, every different person would get a different designation if it's a police car. And then the numbers also mean other things. So, like, in Cuba, people who know can look at a car, read the plates, and know exactly who it is, who it's supposed to be driving the vehicle. So, in theory, in Cuba, a police officer is a government person. So, he wouldn't get a P tag. He would get a different tag. And then it would have to be a government-issued car, and if it didn't fit his rank, it would be a question mark on how a regular city cop is driving around in a Mercedes-Benz. So no, police is not able to steal your car in Cuba like they could in Mexico. It's not Mexico. It's an island. It's very small. The license plates are very specific. Getting paperwork for cars is very specific. It isn't this Wild West scenario. Cuba is a very small place. And believe me, the notion of somebody stealing your car in Cuba is literally almost impossible. And if they did, they would have nowhere to hide it. And then you would have the paperwork of figuring out how you're going to get this car registered. It isn't as easy as people think. And again, it's not the United States where you have 50 states next to Canada and Mexico. It's an island the size of Tennessee with 8 million people, and not everybody there has a car. So the license plates are very limited and very trackable, and it's hard for something like a car to disappear on an island like Cuba. So please shut your mouth. Car parts are very accessible, but that's why more European cars or Asian cars are popular, because they can bring just about anything. Let's not forget, you can buy just about anything you want on the marketplace in Cuba right now. Like literally, it's just like here in the United States at this point with the internet. You know, as a joke, me and my wife always tell ourselves, like, if we could have this truck that we have here in Cuba, we'd be like kings over there. And the notion of these Cubans coming over here, getting temporary status, getting deported, but at the same time ripping off the system because they saved money, bought a car, and sent it back to Cuba. Actually, you know, Cuba may not frown upon that. So like all these people that are going back to Cuba now with a brand new car, they may not be frowned upon by the government, because after all, the Cuban government does kind of hate the United States. So the notion of these people coming to the United States, ransacking the United States, and bringing back cars and money to Cuba isn't exactly something that's going to be frowned upon over there. Probably they're going to be like heroes because, you know, they came over here, ransacked the United States, and they went back to Cuba with the best that the United States has to offer, an F-350. So yeah, they may not actually even be in bad standing for what they're doing. They may actually be like kind of like heroes for ripping off the American system. After all, a lot of them knew they were going to get deported, so they were saving money, and others came over here and quickly figured out that if they could just make enough money to buy a F-350 and go back to Cuba with it, they'd be the happiest people on earth, and that was their plan from the get-go. You know, it's like everything. You got people that save money and plan strategically, and then you got people that are complete train wrecks that can't figure out their lives. A lot of these Cubans came over here, started getting comfortable, buying furniture and couches that now they're going to have to throw in the dumpster. You know, they came over here and got comfortable. They decided to start living like Americans, consuming like Americans, buying things they didn't need, partying and drinking, and now they're like, oh crap, we're going to get deported. Well, you know, like with everything, you got smart people and you got stupid people. Like me, I've been telling all my family members that are recent arrivals on temporary status that they need to save money, that they're probably going to get deported. Don't get comfortable here. Start saving money. The same thing with my Uber passengers. You know, I tell them, hey, dude, save money, work hard, don't get comfortable, don't tip your Uber driver, don't go buying cars, don't go buying clothes, get a second, third, fourth job. I've been telling people on temporary status that they're going to get deported, that they need to make the best of it. I got family members that I tell them, hey, you know, you're probably going to get deported, and they're like, they like have an emotional breakdown. Like they can't even face the reality of what they like. You got people that have emotional strength, and you got people that are weak and vulnerable and victims, and they just can't figure out what they're going to do with themselves. And those people are going to get crushed. But the ones that were smart knew what time it was. And that's the situation with Cubans. The smart ones saved money and knew that they could get deported. They were working like animals, 3 or 4 jobs, just trying to get, you know, things figured out. A lot of people on temporary status became residents, and they're going to become citizens, so they're pretty much set. I've actually met people that came as temporary status and are already citizens, or they came under, you know, after 2017 when things got difficult, and they figured out a way, and they're citizens. So like there are those, but overwhelmingly, most people on temporary status are going to get deported. I'm not surprised. I knew this was going to happen. If you guys remember, here in Florida, people like that one lady, I can't remember her name, the crazy lady, the Ashley Moody lady that they sent to Washington, D.C., people like her have been labeling people on temporary status illegally in Florida already. So you kind of knew what the sentiment was and where they were going to go with this. The United States doesn't give people opportunities. It gives people an endless limbo, a dream that they like to crush. That's the way the United States immigration policy works. They like to sell you a dream and then crush you. This is the way immigration works in the United States. To me, it isn't a surprise. If it's a surprise to somebody that they're going to take this away, I'm not surprised in the least bit. I already know how these people work. This is the way their system works. It's a system of selling you a dream and then crushing your dreams. And the United States immigration policy has become an endless limbo. One administration sells you the dream, the other one crushes it. And then another administration sells you another dream, and another one comes and crushes it. It's a back and forth limbo, but nobody actually resolves your problem of legality. All they do is keep you in an endless limbo because that's the way they like to do people. They did it to the dreamers, they did it to the temporary status, and in the future, all these people coming on student visas about to find out what time it really is. You know, before we move on from Cubans, let me just mention that for the most part, Cuba is not a communist country anymore. People are not fleeing communism. That's something people say out of ignorance. Cuba is a dictatorship, and a dictatorship doesn't have to be communist. The United States could become a dictatorship if people keep changing the laws here. So you don't have to, all these people, they're fleeing communism. No, not exactly. They're fleeing a dictatorship. When I left Cuba, everybody said, you're fleeing communists. I didn't give a crap if they were communists or socialists, or I didn't give a crap what they were. I left because they were oppressive, so the United States isn't communist, but it's becoming oppressive. We've considered leaving the United States, but the whole world's a mess right now. So the best thing you could do is just stick to wherever you are and make life comfortable wherever you are. But the reality is that I don't remember communism being the problem when I left Cuba. I remember oppression being the problem. And the United States is becoming pretty freaking oppressive. And people that are coming from Cuba to the United States now are like, dude, this is hate, racism, slavery. You have to work like an animal. Like, even people that are coming from Cuba to the United States are like, yo, this is, we're hungry over there, but this is a whole different problem over here. So, it's when people start to get those perspectives, and then again, those people are coming from Brazil, Costa Rica. They've seen a place or two that is kind of like in the middle. It's not as rich as the United States, but it's not as messed up as Cuba. So there's places in the middle where even Americans are going to Costa Rica. Even Americans are going to all these small little islands and stuff, looking for a place that isn't so capitalistic and where your life is being exploited every second. So that's the situation with Cubans. Let's move on to Nicaraguans. So the United States is no longer even the go-to place for Nicaraguans. Nicaraguans are mostly going to Costa Rica. Now in Costa Rica, they've lowered labor costs, but about 80% of all construction work in Costa Rica right now is being done by Nicaraguans. I don't know if you guys know this, but even Americans are moving to Costa Rica, and the cost of living along the coastline in Costa Rica has become on par with the United States. Like a coffee in Costa Rica costs the same as a coffee here. A slice of pizza there, even rents have become on par with the United States. So many Americans have left and gone to Costa Rica, and Nicaragua is right next to Costa Rica. Now, the reason Nicaraguans are under that temporary status is because Nicaragua took on what we're going to call a regime that's similar to what's going on in Cuba. I'm not going to call it communist because, yeah, they have some communist ideologies, but I don't really think that's even like the right term anymore for these countries in Latin America. I think the real term is like countries that are not like aligned with the United States. They're just disassociated from the United States capitalistic system. So among those countries, you have Cuba, you have Venezuela, and you have Nicaragua. Now, Nicaragua is in the heart of Latin America. It's a very poor country. Things in Nicaragua were not that bad until that regime took place. And if it's gotten bad there, it's become very similar to Cuba. People are afraid to have freedom of speech and stuff like that. So in the case of Nicaraguans and Cubans as well, the United States has always provided some type of amnesty to people who are leaving behind those types of communist or regimes in Latin America and coming to the United States. That's why Nicaraguans had the possibility to fall under that program. Now, Nicaraguans, for the most part, are very hardworking people. And again, a lot of them are already just going to Costa Rica before they even consider the United States. While Uber driving, I've met Nicaraguans who have lived in Costa Rica, and they tell me they absolutely love living in that country. For one, they don't have to learn another language. It's very close to home, so they can work in Costa Rica, and if they want to come back home for a little bit, they can and then go back. So it isn't as far, it isn't as difficult. It's very easy for Nicaraguans to work in Costa Rica. Now, if they go to Panama, they can make more money in Panama, but in Panama, crime and safety is just out of control. So Costa Rica is a safer country. So despite the fact it's easier to make money in Panama, and this is from an Uber passenger that I had who's a Nicaraguan who's lived in Costa Rica and in Panama, and she's on temporary status. Me and her talked about the fact that she's probably going to get deported and what her plans were. And she said, I'm going to go back to Costa Rica. I absolutely loved living there. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people. The standard of living is almost as high as the United States. Jobs pay very well, but Panama is a better country economically. But she said in Panama, you can literally get killed for a cell phone. So it's very similar to the United States. Like a Hispanic can go live in Louisiana or Alabama, Mississippi and make a crap load of money because the people there are lazy and don't want to work. but then they're risking their life in order to do it. And that's kind of the case with Panama, where like, yeah, you can go to Panama and make more money, but then you're practically risking your life every single day. You can get killed for a cell phone. So that's the real situation in Panama, and that's what's happening with Nicaraguans. Nicaraguans getting deported have a lot of options. Yes, their country right now is an absolute mess, but they have neighboring countries that they can go to where they don't need a different language. And hey, talking about risking your life to make a living in the United States, a video from Leader News in Alabama came out of a black man in Mississippi choking out Guatemalans in a restaurant, threatening that he was going to call the cops on them and have them all deported. Now, somebody recorded it with a cell phone and posted it to social media, but basically this is the reality of the Deep South. You know, this is like 6-foot black guy choking some tiny little Guatemalan. He's like 3 foot taller than the Guatemalan, choking them out, beating their heads against counters inside of a bar and restaurants, telling them that if they don't, if he doesn't give them money, that he's going to call the cops and have them all deported. And this is out of legitimate business. The guy behind the register is the owner of the restaurant, and he's a Guatemalan. He's like 4.5 feet tall, and this tall 6-foot black guy with dreads is choking him out, beating him, threatening them that if he doesn't give them money, he's going to get them deported after he beats them. But the guy got arrested, and he's got charges because there was a woman there who quietly, discreetly recorded the whole thing, posted on social media. But that's the reality of being Hispanic in the United States. You can't even live anywhere. Like I told you guys, if you're going to Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, even some parts of South Georgia and North Florida as a Hispanic, your safety is literally in danger. You're going to have people who are going to assault you, and then after they assault you, they'll call the cops on you and have you arrested. So it's a very scary situation for immigrants in the United States. So it isn't a surprise that, with as crappy and violent as the United States has become, that many immigrants are just not that excited to be here. And that's not good news. The United States, used to be the go-to country. And now, a lot of people are going to Chile as well. That's another country in South America. I just did a video on everybody going to Chile recently. It's a beautiful country. It's just as nice as the United States in a lot of ways. So that's another option for Venezuelans, for example. Venezuelans have kind of burned all bridges in the United States. At first, they were welcomed with wide open arms. Much of the wealthy people from Venezuela came to Miami. There's this suburb called Doral. They bought just about everything in the suburb. So the wealthy Venezuelans are already here, they're already legal, and they have very nice suburbs in Florida. So in the case of Venezuelans, the first wave were the aristocrats, the wealthy, who ran away from communism because, of course, communists were going to take all the wealth they had. So, of course, they ran to Miami. And most of those guys that came, with the first wave are legal. And they're very arrogant people by nature. I'm not going to lie, I get a lot of Venezuelans here on Uber. There's a lot of Venezuelans in Florida, and I'll have to be honest. Like out of all and nothing against my Venezuelan brothers. Like even Venezuelans knows it's true, so it's not like we're saying something out of the realm here. But to be direct, Venezuelans are not the most likable of people. They're very arrogant, they're very entitled, they're very rude, disrespectful, very thankless. I get them on Uber all the time. They don't tip. Sometimes they're violent. They're scary actually. They're not very fun. If you get a female, they can be a little bit more talkative and you can kind of have a normal conversation with them. Like I met this one Venezuelan lady. I feel really bad for her because I know she's going to get deported. But she was a temporary status. She was working 3 jobs. I kid you not. 3 jobs. She told me she sleeps for 5 hours. She works 3 jobs, 7 days a week. I made a YouTube video about that when I was, doing the whole Uber blogging thing. So you might remember that story about the Venezuelan lady working 3 jobs, sleeping 5 hours. All she did was work. I think she understood she was going to get deported at some point. So she was just making the best of her time here. There are good ones that came in these last waves, like this woman. All she did was work, But unfortunately, the reality for some Venezuelans isn't too far from the stereotype, man. And it's kind of like when your nationality has so many bad apples in the bunch, it's hard for people to take you serious. And unfortunately for Venezuelans, a lot of the newer wave has just been taken to crime. Not just in the United States. I mean, we're talking, it's a problem in Chile. It's a problem in all of Latin America. It's a problem in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Argentina. Everywhere they land, they get a reputation for being problematic. Mexico is a country with a lot of problems, a lot of violence, and even in Mexico, Venezuelans have gained a bad reputation. I just watched a documentary about this neighborhood in Mexico that was taken over by Venezuelans, and they're outside like junkies on the streets, snatching stuff to buy, they're junkies, they're crackheads, and they're junkies, and they're super violent and super aggressive. and people in this neighborhood in Mexico like are afraid to go outside. Being that basically these Venezuelans moved in, became junkies, and they're out there snatching stuff to get high. So quite the problem in Mexico with Venezuelans. It seems like everywhere Venezuelans have gone, they've burned a bridge. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in Venezuela that turned the people like that, but basically it's like complete anarchy, and the people there are just inclined to delinquency for the most part. Venezuela used to be like one of the richest, it was the richest country in all of Latin America because of its oil. So the people there had Hummers and, Lexuses way before we did in the United States. Like, they were living a really good standard of living, and this regime comes in, takes it away. So there were people that were really entitled. They're very patriotic. Venezuelans were kind of like the Americans of South America. They just were more entitled. They felt they were better than everybody else. And then their country goes to crap overnight, and now they have to flee to other countries. Americans, I hope you're taking notes because this could be you in the future. And then they're the ones that are all over the world. And then because they were a better country, and this is like overnight, they went from being the richest country in Latin America to being like the country with the most immigrants in the whole world overnight. And all that happens with simply one quick change. Boom, now your whole country's gone to crap. All the rich people fled, and now all these entitled people who were used to living this, luxurious lifestyle in Venezuela are having to be an immigrant somewhere else. So not only they're entitled, like they don't want to put themselves in the shoes that they don't want to wear the shoe that fits them. You know what I mean? You're an immigrant, you're in somebody else's country, but then you have this entitled attitude because your country used to be better, but now it's not. So Venezuelans don't want to wear the shoe that fits them. They feel they're better than what they are. In reality, now they're like propense to scamming, fraud, and all types of criminal activity because at the end of the day, they don't want to realize what their new role is. They went from being this powerful Latin American country and wealthy to being immigrants, and a lot of them just can't really deal with that. They feel like deep down they're still better than everybody else, so they treat people disrespectfully, thankless. They're just snobs, basically. And when you're an immigrant, it's not easy being a snob. It doesn't really make you a lot of friends. So that's the very difficult and unfortunate truth about Venezuelans is that. And again, I know the people that from Venezuela that are here working very hard, very humble people. Not everybody fits that shoe, but those that do, boy, are they a lot of trouble. Like, compare them to Guatemalans, for example. Guatemalans come over here, work underneath the table. They're quiet. They're low profile. They don't get involved in anything. No, you see the Venezuelans holding up posters at the border. We have rights and stuff. Like, they're basically snobbed, and that's because they don't come from poverty. They come from a lifestyle similar to here in the United States. Like, Americans would be just like that. Americans, if what happened to Venezuela happened in the United States, Americans would be just like that. Americans would be out there scamming, stealing, waving signs, saying they have rights. Like, no, dude, you're an immigrant now. You're nobody. You're going to come here to wash our dishes and shut up about it. Like Guatemalans, for example, right? Guatemalans don't have a good education, but they're likable. Why are they likable? Because they're humble. You don't see Guatemalans doing horrendous crimes. You don't see Guatemalans doing anything other than working and shutting up. And that's kind of the best role you can play if you're an immigrant. So like when you play this arrogant role as an immigrant, you don't make a lot of friends. So for Venezuelans, it definitely looks grim because again, they just haven't even gained sympathy from other Latin American countries. For example, the Cubans gain sympathy. Like every time you hear stories about like immigrant crossings, the Cubans and this and that, or they all help each other, whatever. But like when you hear stories or even Mexicans, like I hear stories about people like they're Cubans and they're crossing through Mexico and they tell stories about how the Mexicans help them or this or that. Bro, you don't hear those stories about Venezuelans. You hear stories about Venezuelans like flipping on the coyotes or taking over an immigrant camp or even the Mexican cartels don't even want to traffic them because they're afraid of dealing with them because as soon as you get 15 or 17 of them in a room, they kidnap the people that kidnap them, So they're just, they haven't made a lot of friends. So the situation with Venezuelans is definitely grim because of their entitled attitude, the fact they haven't made many friends, and they haven't come to realizations with the fact that you are now an immigrant. You are now nobody, and you have no home. You're homeless practically, and you're homeless in your own continent, even though you have one of the richest natural resources that exists on earth in your home country. So it's a very difficult situation for Venezuelans, and there's no real nice way of putting it. And if you're a Venezuelan hearing this, I hope I didn't hurt your feelings, but it's kind of the truth, and we're trying to be honest here about the situation. Venezuelans have just kind of burned every bridge possible, so they're kind of unwanted everywhere. Okay, let's hop on to Haitians. By the way, ça passe to all my Haitians. So Haitians, most Haitians in the United States are here by reunification of family. So there are Haitians that came under temporary status. Most of Haitians that came under temporary status played their role like a boss. So Haitians, they really are smart. They know the system. They know how this thing works. They're not stupid. Haitians do not spend money regardless. You don't see Haitians out there buying F-350s and GMC trucks. Haitians save their money. They're very good about saving. I think Haitians know that someday Haiti could be a better country that they want to return to, and hopefully it happens for them. It's a country that's constantly changing, and hopefully it changes for the better. So Haitians, they play their role pretty good, and Haitians do have options, by the way. And keep in mind that's only like 8% of Haitians who are on temporary status. So the overwhelming majority of Haitians are legal in the United States and are doing very well. I lived in Naples, Florida, and the cooks, the people that clean the hotels, all those people are Haitians, and they're beloved. They're hardworking people. They stay out of the way. They're respectful. They don't intervene with other people. They go to work and do their thing. At my local Walmart, like 40% of the employees, I think, are Haitians. A lot of them are on temporary status. I don't know what's going to happen to my local Walmart if they're not here because, again, most of these people are working like at a Walmart, then go work at a McDonald's, and then go clean some bathrooms, and then they go home and sleep for 5 hours. So these Haitians on temporary status are practically keeping some communities in line. I mean, like here where I live, drive-thrus, McDonald's, Walmart, all those are nothing but Haitians on temporary status. So I'm really worried about my Haitian people because they're really contributing greatly to Manatee County, Florida, where I live. They are just incredible, very hardworking people. They don't go partying. I'm not picking them up at nightclubs drunk. They don't consume. They don't drink. Haitian people are like freaking exemplary when it comes to being immigrants. I'm really worried about my city because, like I said, all those jobs, low-paying jobs that we need, like night shift at McDonald's and Walmart, stocking and stuff, registers, all those jobs, like if you just saw my video where we went grocery shopping, you might have realized that like half the people at my Walmart are Haitians. So a lot of them are in temporary status. It's kind of a lose for us to lose these people. I'm not going to lie. Haitians are really probably the most desirable out of all these groups. They seem to be the hardest working, and they got a game plan. So I don't think Haitians are going to be in trouble. I think they have a lot of options. A lot of Haitians have gone to Martinique. A lot of Haitians are also going to Chile as well. There's now Haitian communities in Brazil, Chile, I think even in Argentina to a smaller degree. But I know that in Chile and Brazil, there's huge Haitian communities. In Mexico, there's huge Haitian communities now. Beloved. I mean, people in Mexico love the Haitians. I know just south of the border in Tamaulipas, there's like a whole entire Haitian neighborhood. And the people in Mexico, they love the Haitians because they're hardworking, and that's what they want over there. Canada is still an option for a lot of Haitians, a much better country than the United States, but it has very strict immigration policies. I don't remember exactly if this is still valid, but I do know that in Quebec, I think is it a state? I don't know if it's a governor or what they call the person in charge there, but the guy in charge in Quebec, when I was there a year and a half ago, said that anybody on a global level, anybody in the whole world. So in Quebec, the guy there said anybody in the whole world, globally, anywhere on the earth, if you are a French speaker, Canada, Quebec is your home. If you speak French, come here. We have work for you. A lot of Haitians speak French. I think it's like a third of Haitians can speak French. And those who speak Creole, the jump from Creole to French isn't that large. So, Quebec is a possibility for a lot of people looking to leave the United States and find a better country. This is Montreal, Canada. There's already an established Haitian community here. Montreal is a beautiful city. Just about everybody that I've met who's been to Montreal says they love this city. It's got a lot of culture, a lot of diversity. Unlike American cities that are plagued with homelessness, crime, and violence, cities in Canada are considerably safer. In fact, Toronto is the most diverse city in the world, and it also has a homicide rate that's about a quarter that of America's safest cities. Let's just give you an idea that the most dangerous cities in Canada are safer than the safest cities in the United States. Canada has welcomed immigrants from all over the world, but it has a very strict immigration policy. Only the best immigrants can enter Canada. Personally, when I entered Canada, I received a lot of scrutiny from their border people. They thought that I was trying to leave the United States and move to Canada because of the racial oppression in the United States. Now, I don't know what made them think that, but like I said, I had my passport, everything was good to go. But when I showed up to the border in Canada, they were like, "You're Hispanic from Florida. We think you're trying to stay here." And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" So I had to show them my bank accounts. They searched my vehicle extensively. And I had to prove to them that I wasn't trying to live in Canada. For some reason, they thought that being a Hispanic from Florida, that I would want to be in Canada because it's better. So that was the reality of me going to Canada. It was kind of a lot of scrutiny. So it was very stressful to enter Canada because of the way the border people assumed that we were leaving the United States. Very interesting. But regardless, there's a huge Haitian community in Canada. And I think it's healthier, cleaner, better, and just all around, Canada is a better place for immigrants than the United States. It's crazy that they would think that as a US citizen, I would want to leave my country illegally to go theirs, but apparently it's a thing. A lot of people are actually just tired of the United States and trying to find something better in Canada. So those immigrants, like the Haitians, I mean, the United States didn't give them a lot of time. They gave them like a very short period. They have like until April 20th, which is practically a joke, for these people to get their stuff in order. It's not a lot of time for them to figure this out. Those who want to live in Canada are going to have like a very extensive, it's not like you can just sign up to go to Canada. Like it's a very extensive process. And I feel like Canada could be an option for a lot of Haitians, but now they're put in a situation where how much time do they really have to figure this out? Knowing Canada, I think they're going to adjust to that. And again, Canada does want these people, especially if they were already vetted by the U.S., allowed to stay in the U.S., were working in the U.S. Those are the types of people Canada might make an exception for because overall they have a very strict entry process to Canada. It's almost as long as their red lights. In fact, it seems like all we did while we were in Montreal was sit at red lights. So for Haitians, Canada is a great option. The real issue is going to be how strict their immigration policy is and how the deadline that these people are going to have to meet may not be enough time for them to figure out legal entry into Canada, a country that would definitely welcome them, offer them better safety, better incomes, better possibilities. And how about this? How about respect and dignity, something that we're not getting as immigrants in the United States? Even me as a U.S. citizen, just because I'm Hispanic, you're constantly being disrespected. And it really gets old really fast. Me and my wife have talked about maybe Spain or something like that, but we just can't afford to leave because life has become so unaffordable that we're living paycheck to paycheck. But anyways, Haitians have the option of looking at Canada, a much better, safer country. That is just a lot of regulation. Living in Canada is over-regulated in a lot of ways, and perhaps that's what makes Canada a better country too. It's just when you live in the United States, you get used to what they call freedom here. Of doing whatever the crap you want. You can't just shoot people in Canada in traffic. We're used to doing that here in the United States. In Canada, they have real rules and you actually have to follow them. So being illegal in Canada isn't really a thing like it is here in the United States. At the end of the day, like most Latin Americans don't have the option of Canada. For one, the weather is unbearable. If Canada had tropical weather, it would probably outdo the United States all the way around. It's those cold weather months that make life in Canada just unbearable. If Canada had warm weather, it could definitely be like way better than the United States all the way around. It's just the weather. When it comes to safety though and general living, it's a very good country. We enjoyed our time there. It's a very diverse, beautiful country, but I think out of all these groups, probably only Haitians really have an entry into Canada. There are Cubans and Venezuelans and Colombians and stuff like that in Canada, but just really, really small numbers. Latin Americans don't really go for Canada that much. I know a lot of Cubans are also considering Europe. Spain welcomes anybody who's a third-generation Spaniard. A lot of Cubans are, like myself. I could literally just go to Spain and become a Spanish citizen because my grandpa was born in the Canary Islands. So this is just kind of another option that Cubans particularly have. Americans assume that they're the only country in the world that people can go to. And in reality, there's a lot of countries right now that have great standard of living. Canada, Chile, Argentina, not all Argentina, of course, but lots of parts of Chile, lots of Argentina. In Chile, I think they're going to eventually have to crack down on immigration because it really hasn't worked out great. It's a beautiful, safe country, but the living standards for immigrants there are just too low. Canada, on the other hand, offers a really high standard of living for immigrants, so does most of Europe. But then there are countries that have a lot more requirements, and a lot of people coming from Latin America in particular are kind of, they like the slower paced life. They don't like life to be too complicated, but life in Europe and Canada is a lot more complicated and structured than Latin America. I mean, crap, it seems more structured and complicated than the United States. And that's okay for like Asian immigrants, for example, or European immigrants, but it sure isn't what Latin Americans want. Latin Americans just like to work and get their hands dirty and just go out there and get to work. But these are countries that have a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, and informalities just don't really lend themselves too well in a place like Canada, a country that, in my opinion, is more regulated than the United States. But those are options that people have. I think in my case, Cubans, a lot of them, even in deportation, are realizing their dream. I mean, to be fair, driving around Cuba in a brand new F-350 or GMC truck, even facing deportation, if you can take home a nice brand new truck to Cuba, that truck will pay itself off very well and it'll make their lives that much easier over there. I'm sure they can rent it out and literally make a living off it. After all, in Cuba, they got Chevys from the 1950s that are still running, so we can assume that the life of these GMC trucks in Cuba will be very long. Perhaps they will become the new icon of Cuba's vehicular culture. After all, these individuals came to the United States, they worked, they saved a lot of money, they didn't have to pay rent, they probably stayed in a family member's garage or something, and they saved all the money they could, and now they're going back to Cuba with something to show for it. A lot of people in the United States have lived there their whole lives, and they have never done anything productive. So, of course, they're going to be jealous that somebody came here and in a few years accomplished what they in a lifetime haven't because they're too lazy to get off their butts. And, of course, you got all the people saying that the trucks are stolen and they're criminals or they stole everything. Look, you've been in the United States your whole life, and you've never accomplished anything. Somebody comes here on a temporary status and does more in 3 years than you have your whole life because you're an unproductive piece of crap. Just because you can't attain to anything with your life doesn't mean that other people are not driven. When people have lived in Haiti and Cuba their whole lives and they come to the United States, they're going to do more in those 3 years here than you have in your whole life because they have more appreciation for what it is to have things than you ever will. So for those people that are saying that these trucks are stolen and they're sending stolen trucks to Cuba, it's not even realistic. They're going through a port, so obviously they're getting checked by U.S. It's ridiculous of a thing to say. But at the end of the day, it's really hard for people who've never accomplished anything in their lives to accept the reality that somebody came here on a temporary status, saved up a few $100,000 in a few years by working hard, saving money, not being a victim of consumerism, not being a drug addict, not spending all their money on drugs and alcohol like you do here, not being lazy and playing video games or being on YouTube like you do. They came here, they worked, they made money, and now they're going back to their country with a lot of money and good things that they earned here in the United States. It just goes to show that what people don't have in the United States is appreciation for what we have. People here get too comfortable, they get too complacent, and then they get jealous when they see somebody else who came from nothing get ahead, It's not even like, it's okay if you don't want to do anything with your life, but then you can't even accept that other people are able to come here and be successful. Believe me, there's a lot of people getting deported right now from the United States that are going to Cuba, and they're going to be driving around one of these things in Havana while you've been here your whole life and are still driving around a freaking bus because you're too lazy to get off your butt. Or don't get me started, you got a DUI so you can't even drive anymore. Yeah, some people are going to get deported and they're going to go back with nothing because they weren't smart enough. But believe me, there's people that took advantage of the temporary status, and now they're sitting back in Cuba with 2 brand new trucks, things that you could have accomplished here in the United States and you didn't because you were too lazy instead of worrying about how you can take care of your son and his people. Like, how do you get all these things in 2 or 3 years? Oh, let me see. Very freaking simple. By the way, you're an idiot if you can't figure this out. One, they're working construction, which pays a lot of money. You don't work at construction because you're too lazy. You're too fragile. Your hands can't get dirty. Number two, they're living with their family members. They're living 10 people to a house to save money on rent. They're not being eaten alive by the cost of rent because they're able to live with other people. Can you live with other people? Probably not. They don't spend money on drugs like you do. How much money do you spend on drugs? How much money do you spend on alcohol? So when you see somebody shipping a freaking brand new truck to Cuba and they've only been here for a few years and you scratch your, how do they do that? Well, for one, they're not a drug addict like you. They're not lazy like you. They can live with other people in peace unlike you. And then they're not being victims of consumerism like you. Because at the end of the day, they eat affordably, they eat less, they eat healthier, they cook at home, they save money. They're not victims of consumerism. That's why they're able to save up $100,000 in a few years and take a brand new diesel truck to Cuba, which they're going to be able to probably live off for the rest of their life. Because I'll be honest, in Cuba, things last forever. You see those 56 Chevys are still driving around? These trucks right here are the new 56 Chevys. These things are going to be around for a while, and the people that own them are going to make a crap load of money. Basically, if you got this truck in Cuba, you're going to live better than somebody here in the United States, because this truck in Cuba will make you more money over there, and there's nothing to spend money on Cuba. So whatever money they do take, they can stretch it. Oh, and I said there's no property taxes, no income taxes, none of that crap in Cuba. So yeah, now they're pretty much set. So that's the reality for some Cubans who are smart. And without a doubt, Cubans had to go through Latin America to get to the United States. And that means that they were able to pick up game on Latin Americans, Central Americans. What do Central Americans do? They come to the United States, work like animals for 4 or 5 years, go back home with a brand new truck, buy a little farm, and they're set. And this is a notion Cubans were kind of alien to, because when most Cubans leave Cuba, they never go back. But these people had the option to come to the United States, and now they have to go back. So it's a little bit of game they picked up from Salvadorians and Hondurans and Latin Americans who come to the United States, get enough money to get started. And once you have that money in those countries, you're set for life. It's not like here in the United States where every year you have to make $100,000. Once you got a little farm and a pickup truck in one of these Latin American countries, it's pretty much self-sustainable at that point. It's a lot more easy of a lifestyle than the misery we have to live here in the United States. It's 4 in the morning and I'm uploading a video. So that should just give you an idea of how hectic life is in the United States, something that a lot of people are getting tired of. A lot of people dream about living in a Latin American country, an island somewhere where life isn't so freaking hectic. So maybe it isn't so bad to get deported. I just recently saw a video of some Dominicans that got deported. They were showing Dominicans getting off, and they interviewed a few Dominicans that were here in the United States illegally, and they're just like, what a mistake it was to go to the United States. Here in the Dominican Republic, I didn't have to work that hard. I didn't have a fixed schedule. I didn't have to shovel snow. I would just wake up, drink some rum, and party and live a good life. And I went to the United States thinking it was the American dream, and it actually became the American nightmare. So a lot of people really haven't enjoyed living here after all. It just isn't for them. Life here is too hectic. It's definitely not for everybody. Can you imagine having this truck parked out front of your house in Cuba that doesn't pay taxes, doesn't pay income taxes? You just rent this thing out for $500 a day or whatever, and just live off that for 5 or 6 months basically. Yeah, it's definitely a lot less complicated of a lifestyle.